10 years ago, I left the United States to chase my American dream in Europe. I found that for me and how I like to live, the grass is generally greener here. Now I'm a German and EU citizen with zero desire to detach myself from this continent. And these days, I'm not alone in that desire to leave the United States in search of better opportunities. Last year saw a record number of Americans leaving the US, and Europe remains a dream destination for many wannabe immigrants. So I'm often asked in the comments how I did it. How did I immigrate from the United States to Europe, or Germany specifically? If that's something you've been wondering, then this video is for you. But in case you are new here, my name is Joe Bauer, an American immigrant living in Europe for the past 10 years and traveling around the world even longer. I publish a new video every Thursday that tries to close the gap between the story we're told about a place and the reality on the ground. So how does an unremarkable Applebee's American from the suburbs of Northeast Ohio end up living in Berlin? Let's start at the beginning. I've joked on this channel before that I'm a bit of an ethnic mutt, a British Isles, Swiss-Irish, Ashkenazi Jew. I've long been fascinated by genealogy and the idea that I could be comprised of so many different identities, something that would have been frankly incredibly rare for most of human history, where you kind of just shacked up with someone from the same village. I know this because that was essentially my family tree until relatively recently. My surname Bauer comes from my great-great-grandfather out of Switzerland. Even though my Swissness is far removed, I was long enthralled with the idea of returning to Switzerland and, I don't know, maybe meeting some long-lost family members. This is what first stoked my interest in spending some time in Europe. Now let's fast forward to my senior year of university. I was fresh off a summer of studying abroad in India, my first time overseas, and was wondering what it might be like to actually live abroad, permanently or at least for a long period of time. Now, Switzerland was, in my mind, a natural candidate. But of course, I quickly learned that Switzerland didn't have much use for a then monolingual non-European with, and I don't mean to brag here, zero remarkable skills. Still, the idea stuck with me, and I started to read more about Europe in general, how the Dutch cycle everywhere, the gorgeous medieval cities, and the rail networks that crisscross the continent. This all happened at a time that I started to question the inherent superiority of life in the United States. Often seen as a key ingredient to living your best American dream is having a car, something I grew to fiercely loathe for a variety of reasons, ranging from, I don't know, what they've done to our landscape, our cities, the number of people they kill, how expensive they are, and just how much more stressful they generally made life. Car ownership was a financial and physical albatross hanging around my neck, of which I wanted to rid myself. In my mid-20s, I decided I needed to make a change, to make a move even. A life in Europe seemed like a challenging yet attainable dream. But how could I just, up and move to Europe? How could I get a job? We've already determined I was the polar opposite of Liam Neeson in Taken without a particular set of skills. I decided I should go to graduate school. That's the thing people do in their mid-20s. But coming from the United States, I generally had to prove that I could support myself for a 2-year program without getting a job. I remember I was really hooked on an urban design degree out of the University of Oslo that would have been virtually free of tuition, but I didn't have the savings in my mid-20s working as a freelance personal trainer to support myself and my soon-to-be wife in Norway of all places for 2 years. That's when I started to look at Costa Rica, where the cost of living would be more affordable and we'd be able to work at least part-time. For reasons I still don't understand, my program only lasted for 1 academic year and I got my master's degree. So Costa Rica helped scratch my itch for living abroad, but it also planted a seed that told me I really needed to try Europe. I moved back to the US in June of 2015, and it wasn't long before my wife and I started talking about what a move to Europe could look like. Serendipity struck later that year when I went to a travel conference in Fort Lauderdale, Florida of all places. I remember how it reinforced my burning desire to try living someplace where you could generally avoid cars because of the number of times drivers almost hit me trying to walk around that area. But it was at that conference that I walked by a booth for Trivago, the online hotel platform. You probably know them from the commercials with the guy every desperate housewife wanted to bang. There were 2 women working the booth, and I noticed they were speaking Spanish with each other. I was still relatively fresh off of my time in Costa Rica, so I thought I'd be smooth by introducing myself in Spanish. I am very much not smooth. But that's when I learned that Trivago was based in a place called Dusseldorf in Western Germany. Of course, at that time I thought Dusseldorf sounded like some kind of made-up Harry Potterism for a kid from a German village. But hey, it's a real place! By this point, I knew how difficult it could be for non-EU immigrants to find a visa sponsor. They mentioned they were from Mexico, so I asked them how they managed to get a visa. Trivago, as it turns out, regularly hired non-EU citizens from around the world. We exchanged information and I kept an eye out for jobs. Fast forward to the following spring, a job opens up to manage their Singaporean blog. I obviously wasn't qualified for that, but they humored me nonetheless with an interview. I didn't get the job, but I guess I left a good enough impression that I was later asked to interview for a PR gig managing US markets. And that's the job I got that sent us packing for Germany. There were a few things I didn't know up front that might scare off normal, more rational folks. First, Germany generally has a 6-month Probezeit or trial period where either side can cancel the contract within the first 6 months. In other words, we could have moved our entire lives overseas only to have my contract canceled. And it happens. My salary wasn't high enough to get an EU Blue Card, which generally gives you more flexibility in finding a job. My visa was tied to this specific contract. So if they would have canceled it, I would have had to find a new sponsor. The other thing I didn't quite fully grasp at first was the risk of accepting a 1-year contract. My long-term goal was to get EU citizenship, so that meant I would have to proactively push to get my contract renewed until I worked there long enough to either qualify for a blue card or look for a job somewhere else. Even though the risk-adverse move would have been to, well, not move, we decided to go for it. And fortunately, everything worked out in the end. I was proactive about having my contract renewed and remained proactive whenever it came to strengthening my visa, from my first restrictive Aufenthaltstitel to the blue card, EU permanent residency, and then finally in July of 2024, German citizenship. And that, sports fans, is how I left the United States. Now I know what you might be thinking. How the hell does that meandering story help me get my ass out of the United States? I guess the overarching point is that, like so many immigrants whose dream is to move to the US or Canada, no singular journey is the same. Things that might not seem connected now might later line up. Case in point, I surmised that Fort Lauderdale probably wouldn't be my jam before going to that conference, but it felt like the professional thing to do. Plus, I did get a writing assignment to Miami and was able to take the train down, so I made the most of it. Maybe I end up in Europe eventually, even without that chance encounter with Trivago at the travel conference. Who knows? But I do know that it ended up being my first step to Europe, even though that's not why I signed up to go to that conference. So if you want one easily digestible piece of advice, it's just say yes and be open to the risk. Say yes and make the most of opportunities as they're presented to you. Be kind and curious when you meet people, and make it known that you want to move to Europe. You never know how things might align in the end. Now, although I always say that the grass ended up being greener in Europe for me and how I like to live, that doesn't mean it was easy. Being an immigrant is hard. There's all kinds of bureaucracy to fight through, the stress of uncertainty that you might lose your visa, and all without the support system of family. And then back wherever you're from, family members will get sick, nieces and nephews will be born, and friends will get married while you're gone. I've met so many people in the United States who've said they would love to try living in Europe, but it's just not the right time right now. The truth is, there will never be a perfect moment to make the move. That's just the reality. This is all partly why I'm proud to call myself an immigrant. To me, it's a title earned, much like a doctorate, and I earned it by overcoming all the highs and lows of making a life for myself in Europe. Now, I know some of you are watching this thinking, okay, Joe, but I have more specific questions about visas, jobs, travel writing, whatever. If you do want to dig deeper or chat one-on-one about your specific situation, I've created a Patreon where I'll be doing monthly Ask Me Anything videos, and I'm offering all kinds of perks. Or you can just support the channel and make your voice heard by voting on upcoming video ideas. In the meantime, watch this video over here on how the car-oriented American suburb I grew up in pushed me to living a car-free life in Europe.